So, ladies and gentlemen, today in Sports File, we're going to take a look at the very talented and complicated NHL goalie that, for a lot of people, were just glad to see him still around because he's been through a lot in his life. Clint Malarchuk. Now, if anybody knows Clint Malarchuk, especially in New Brunswick, he got a big start with the Quebec Nordiques program, played in Frankton Express for a little while, and became people from the Maritimes became quite enamored with him. So when the difficulties in his life cropped up later on, including during his NHL career, people had great sympathy and great respect for him because he'd been through a lot. So we're going to talk about his career and the incident where, if you don't know about it, we're going to detail a little bit and kind of explain what exactly went on and the ramifications in his life and career. Now, born May 1st, 1961, in the great Alberta community of Grand Prairie, Malarchuk was one of the bigger goalies in the NHL at the time, 6'1", 185 pounds. He was drafted 74th overall by the Nordiques in 1981 after a very prestigious junior career, including 2 years for the Fort Saskatchewan Traders of the AJHL and 3 years for the Portland Winterhawks. Now, he was a very, very successful goalie in junior. His second season in Fort Saskatchewan, he had 36 wins in 52 games. In Portland, 1979-80, he had 21 victories with only 10 losses. High goals against average, but that's normal for the Western Hockey League. And the Nordiques decided to draft him specifically to not say back up their franchise players, but he was he was a breath of fresh air on the Quebec team that came into the league in 1980 and were having difficulty with their backstops, and that's how we got in the NHL because when Quebec finally decided to bring up TNHL, he had it was December 13, 1981. If anybody remembers the 80-81 season, Montreal's and Quebec's big rivalry was starting to build up. Now, he got to start in a road game against the Buffalo Sabres, actually his future team. They were dissatisfied with backup goaltender Michel Laplace, and he decided to give Malarchuk a look. And only 20 years old, just turned 20. He did well enough in that game, which ended up with a 4-4 tie. And he also played against the Islanders, which were the Stanley Cup champions, a couple of days later. And it was an audition that he returned him to the Frankton Express after the game, but he didn't come back until the following season. Now, Quebec made a big decision over the off season, trading Place to the Hartford Whalers in return for the capable John Garrett, and they felt Garrett was going to be the backup to acclaimed starter Dan Bouchard. Now, he played sparingly with Quebec in the next 2 years. And 84-85, he was again in Frankton for a whole season. But by the time 85-86 came along, he became the number one goalie for the Nordiques, keeping that role for 2 seasons. And again, those big games against Montreal. And a lot of people felt that the coaching staff couldn't really make a decision between him and Mario Gosselin, and he was also involved in that infamous brawl in the '84 playoffs for Montreal and Quebec went at it. He never played in the game, but he received 15 penalty minutes, even though he didn't start a contest. Now, in one of the most lopsided trades that the Nordics did, or people thought it would lopsided, he was traded to the Capitals after the 86-87 season, along with Dale Hunter in return for Gaetan Duchesne, Alan Howard, and a first-round draft choice in '87 entry draft, which actually turned out to be Joe Sakic. But a lot of people feeling him and Hunter traded for just some marginal players and a number one pick. They never thought that the Nordiques would end up in last place, and when they did, it ended up being Joe Sakic. Now, here's where the big situation has. Malarchuk in the game against the St. Louis Blues on March 22nd suffered one of the most devastating injuries a goalie can ever suffer. Um, Steve Tuttle of the Blues, who was a good solid player and not a dirty player, and he crashed with Yuri Krupp of the Sabres into his net, and Tuttle's skate blade came up. And at the time, ladies and gentlemen, there was no plastic protective area below the mask, and it hit the right side of Malarchuk's neck and severed his carotid artery. And if anybody knows what a carotid artery is, if you sever that and survive, you got the luck of the Irish or the luck of God behind you, because he almost bled out on the ice. He left barely could get off the ice on his own feet, with the assistance of his team's athletic trainer, Jim Puzzatelli, who many credit for saving him that day, because it was a trauma responder before. And the fans that saw that, and there's videotapes of this all over the internet because of the multiple camera angles for any Buffalo game. It was just heartbreaking to the fans in there. And I might suggest this: don't look that up thinking you're going to get a thrill watching a hockey player possibly die on the ice. It was the NHL at the time. There wasn't as many safety procedures, and that was more of going on. But I saw it the night that it happened, and let me tell you, I'm still shocked he's still alive. And the crowd took it really hard. Actually, 11 fans fainted, two more had heart attacks, and three players on both teams vomited on the ice. And the Sabres announced team, including Ted Darling and Mike Robitaille, were just devastated as well. He said how shocking it was. They thought he was going to die, and Malarchuk as well. Though he said in published reports, especially in the book he published about his career years later, all he wanted to do was just get off the ice. He knew his mother was watching the game at home, and he did want to see his mother see him die in the ice, like to die, if he's going to die like off screen, because that scene is a trigger for a lot of people who have suicidal tendencies or have panic disorder syndrome, because it's that dramatic. Now, because Puzzatelli was a former Army combat medic who served in Vietnam, he knew what needed to be done. He gripped Malarchuk's neck and pinched off the blood vessel, and not letting go until doctors arrived to begin stabilizing the wound. Now, they had to do a procedure. It's called kneeling. Someone gave extreme pressure on Malarchuk's collarbone. It caused a low breathing rate and a low metabolic rate, which is he could have bled out if he didn't do that. Now, Malarchuk, get this, was conscious through the whole procedure. And he joked, he said, you fix me up, can be back in the third period. Now, the game resumed when the league personnel received word that Malarchuk was a stable condition. Now, the injury caused him to lose more than 7 pints of blood. It took 300 stitches to close the wound, but he was back on the ice in the next 10 days. Now, Malarchuk, because of the injury and because of his mental health issues, his performance declined over the next few years, and he decided to leave the NHL. The transition from the Nordiques to the Capitals to Buffalo was traumatic for him, and he decided to give up on hockey for a while. And after the incident, he struggled for obsessive compulsive disorder, which he actually had signs of at a young age, and he was suffering from nightmares and alcoholism. But he continued in the International Hockey League, and continued later on after retirement player as a coach. Now, what's funny about this? Richard Zegnick, a former Montreal Canadian, who was playing with Florida at the time, in a game actually coincidentally against Buffalo. He suffered an injury similar to Malarchuk after Olli Jokinen's skate blade cut the front of Zednik's neck, which injured his common carotid artery. And when Malarchuk saw that incident, and Zednik, recovered as well, He confessed he was been suffering from PTSD for quite a while. Now, it was so weird about Malarchuk because in minor pro he did quite a bit in minor pro with the San Diego Gulls and the Las Vegas Thunder. He actually became the head coach of the team for a while for the Thunder. But you know the signs of the post traumatic stress and the obsessive compulsive was always there. Uh, but you know he he said in the book that we'll talk about in a few minutes, he always had difficulty understanding why he survived that. How people didn't really understand what he went through because his, you know, a lot of reporters like me, when you think of Clint Malarchuk, we think about the incident, but he was a good goalie. And I think in his own mind, he felt maybe he let his Buffalo, Washington, and the Quebec fans down by not having a career that a lot of people predicted for him. And you know, by the 1889 season, um, he continued his coaching career, moving on to Seattle Steelheads until you know 2000. He became a goaltending coach for the Panthers in 2003 season. Later on for the Columbus Blue Jackets in 2007, and he was also a goaltending consultant for the Thrashers in you know 2010 2011, and then he went on to Calgary. Now. There were substance abuse problems. There were different things going on, but the major incident that you know that second major incident in his life um, on October 7, 2008, Malarchuk tried to kill himself with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his chin on a 22 caliber rifle in his location in Fish Springs, Nevada. He was suffering a lot of stress and domestic problems. Initially, it was said it was a hunting accident, but the goalie and his wife have since said he tried to kill himself. And I guess it was a miracle he survived because the bullet didn't went through his chin, but it didn't went through the rest of his body. And you know uh, it was there's been medical reports showing how to survive, and we still don't know in the sports media industry how he did survive. You know, maybe just a wrong angle or just basically his you know upper chin development and stuff like that. But there was a combination of substance abuse, over medication, you know, the PTSD, the social anxiety and all that. Now, when he settled on in Nevada, he raised his family there, and actually went into, of all things, veterinary work, and he became a house dentist. You know, from his horse dentist from his ranch, which you know it's quite the life he's lived. Like I said, now his nickname in hockey he was called the Cowboy Goalie. Now he became active in the Calgary, Alberta area roadie scene during the off season. He always had a love of animals, and a lot of people think that's how you know he survived the many traumas he went through. Now Malarchuk's official autobiography called The Crazy Game was released in November 2014, and it eventually became a documentary film, which actually is essential viewing for anybody who wants to understand the importance of treating athletes with you know obsessive compulsive mental health issues and all that. He's opened a lot of doors for players to say, you know, have had issues. Like I said, he wasn't from obviously not from the Goon group that you know suffered a lot of the mental illness from post concussion syndrome and stuff like that. Now, what he does now, which is very positive, him and his wife tour the world as public speakers about topics covered in books such as obsessive compulsive disorder, support for alcoholics in recovery, suicide prevention, and psychological trauma. Now, on May 7, 2015, Malarchuk was a honored guest speaker at the Canadian Mental Health Association meeting in Oakville, and he also was him and his wife were also big guests of the International OCD Foundation conference in Boston. And for a lot of people that have mental health issues, they call that triggers. It could be a sound or whatever. But I found through the years, through my own contact with people in the media, contact with people in the mental health industry, my own contact with members of my family and friends that suffer from mental illness, they cannot watch the Malarchuk incident. Even if it comes up in conversation, it makes them very wary because, anything dealing with self-harm or suicide or blood or big trauma really freaks a lot of people out because, it was a moment of helplessness. If you can describe a person's life in one incident, when Malarchuk had that injury, he was saved, but he wasn't. He didn't save. He couldn't save himself. He was, had ups and downs and the drugs and the drinking and different stuff like that. But he's a survivor. You have to respect him an awful lot, and a very talented goalie. I mean, for what he did with the Nordiques, especially in those 2 years, he had a great goals against average. Probably one of the most underrated young players on the Nordiques in his era, and his time with the Sabres again. Mostly as a number two goalie or a backup, but the talent was there. If Malarchuk would have worked on these issues, obviously, a little bit earlier in his career, if this was like, for example, if he would have come to the NHL now, a lot of his mental health issues would have been, not say, cleared up, but it would have been helped to a level. But again, when he came in the late 70s, early 80s, people didn't talk about mental health. He didn't really know how much mental health has an impact on a person's life. It was kept hidden. Now everything's much more open, and we're in an era where people, help phone and different Bell Let's Talk. He's come a long way, and to know Clint Malarchuk is still alive despite all the traumas that were thrust upon him or that he lived through. To know he talks to young people, he talks to older people, the aged. I think it's very important. I'd like to thank Clint Malarchuk for giving back in a category where anybody would have difficulty. Imagine this: if he dies, the first thing people that don't know how good of a goalie was going to go back to that bloody incident in Buffalo, and I mean that's not fair. He basically was a great NHL goalie with a potential to be a good star, but just that all factors worked against him. And for people in New Brunswick, when he played with the Express, he looked up to him. I mean, he played 4 seasons in Frankton, and that's another one of the New Brunswick heroes that played pro hockey. He wasn't from New Brunswick, obviously, but for a lot of people, he was their hero growing up, especially the 82 season when the Nordiques really plugged the Franklin Express franchise, where the Aiken Center was a hot place to watch hockey. A lot of up and coming young Nordiques were there, and Malarchuk again. It was never meant to be in Quebec to be the great goal he ended up people predicted him to be, but for what he was very talented. So on this day before Good Friday, we give everyone wish everybody good luck, all the blessings of the Lord. And if you ever meet Clint Malarchuk, he's a good guy. Like I say, he's been through a lot. But just basically, if you are from New Brunswick or the Maritime, just tell him how much we appreciated his time in Frankton, because any person that spends 4 years in the minor leagues in a medium-sized city like Frankton, either in AHL, CHL, whatever, he's an alumni that's well respected, and a lot of people were so proud when he went on with that great 2 seasons with the Nordiques when he was called up, and it's New Brunswick proud. That's all I can say. So again, ladies and gentlemen, keep your stick on the ice, and don't forget you got to find a way to protect your opponents in hockey. Don't play dirty. Always watch your skates. Always protect the other player, because they will protect you in the same situation. Hopes to find you well. Have a good day. Bye.